Okay, so for those of you who missed class this morning and last week, I'm going to record this video so you can understand what the New Deal programs are. So as we know, it is 1932, 1933-ish. We just had the election of 1932. FDR wins the election pretty much in a landslide because the American people were really annoyed with Herbert Hoover, who was the president when the stock market crashed and then the Great Depression started. So they were just frustrated with his inaction and they were ready for a change. FDR presented himself as this really personable guy. The American people were all about it because up until this point, presidents really didn't connect with the American people as much as FDR did. And he just kind of seemed like an average Joe. People were like, hey, yo, we're all about FDR. And he made a lot of promises that he was going to help people get out of this really crappy situation that they were in during this Great Depression. So the first program that we're going to talk about is the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. So this is the FDIC. Banks actually operate under the FDIC today. It's an insurance program. So what happened during the Great Depression, or like right before the Great Depression happened, is that banks were not held to the same standard that they are today. So a lot of bankers were corrupt and they would take people's life savings and they would do something called speculation. And that's pretty much gambling with people's money. And the people had no idea that was going on. And so when they lost that money, people lost everything. So this is one way that I think about it. If you have a bunch of cash and you don't trust banks and you keep all of your money in a sock drawer, and someone comes, robs your house, and they take your money, there's no way you're ever going to be able to get that money back. But if you keep your money in a bank with this Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, or the FDIC, your money is insured up to $5,000 at that point. So if you have $5,000 or like $100 to $5,000 in the bank, if the bank gets robbed, if something happens and the economy crashes, you're going to be able to have access to that money thanks to this program. And this is one of the New Deal programs implemented by FDR. So the next program we're going to talk about is the Agricultural Adjustment Administration. As we know, during World War I, the government asked farmers to grow more crops, to raise more livestock so that they could send it overseas to the troop. Well, then the Treaty of Versailles and all that stuff happens and the war ends. And while this is good for the people that the war ended, because World War I was a very brutal and bloody war, it wasn't good for the farmers because they had all this surplus food that they weren't able to sell for a profit. So what happens is the government says, hey, yo, we're going to pay a subsidy, and this is going to be extra money that we're going to give you so you can actually live off of being farmers. But in order to qualify for the subsidy, you have to kill off all your extra animals. You have to grow fewer crops so other farmers can make money as well. This was a problem because food insecurity was an issue during the Great Depression. Like, people didn't have access to food. And so this was pretty much paying farmers to throw away perfectly fine crops and animals that people could have eaten. So we'll talk about that again tomorrow. Homeowners Loan Corporation. This program was created for people who were having trouble repaying bank loans that they had taken out to buy homes. The contracts that homeowners had with the banks are called mortgages. So if you own a house or you're trying to own a house, you pay a mortgage. And instead of like rent, where it just goes to your landlord every month, a mortgage goes towards your house so that one day when you finish paying it, you'll own it. So this was redone so that homeowners could repay the loan over a longer period of time at a lower interest rate. This meant that their monthly payments were a lot smaller and they were much easier to manage. So this cut down on people losing their homes during the Great Depression. But I want you to think about what kind of people were able to afford a home during the 1920s, 1930s. It's the middle class. It's the middle class and the rich. So if you were poor and you had no option but to rent, and you couldn't pay your rent because you lost your job because of the Great Depression, what would happen to those who were lower income is that they would lose their houses and they would become homeless. And so this was a very interesting approach because it didn't help those who were most in need. It helped like the middle class, the upper class, people that really didn't need that extra help. So now we have the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps. This program focused on hiring single young men between the ages of 18 to 25 to work in the forests and national parks. So the men would get these jobs. They would take their tents and like an axe and they would go out to the woods and cut down trees and beautify the land. And the majority of the money that they were making was going right back to their families. And so this was kind of a win-win situation for the US government because not only were these young men working to build up the national parks and the woodlands, but also it was a win for these families who really needed income, and their sons were able to provide that for them. Next, we have the Tennessee Valley Authority. Tennessee and the other states in the South were having a lot of economic trouble because they didn't have a solid infrastructure. So they decided with the Tennessee Valley Authority, you know what, let's build some dams and power plants across Tennessee or like the southern region, so that we can improve people's lives that are living in this area. Through building these dams, it will make a more affordable option for electricity. And it's also going to create jobs and create an industry for people to have jobs in this region. So this was actually quite successful. It did target those states in particular because they were lacking that infrastructure, but a lot of people were living in the South. The National Youth Administration was a training program designed for young people. So it would take these kids who might not have marketable skills, and they would train them for free. They would teach them how to do carpentry. So that's like building cabinets and furniture and things like that. Baking, so you could work at a bakery. Clerical work, so you could be someone's secretary. Library skills. So this was a very skills-based learning opportunity for the youth to learn these skills so that they could get jobs to support their families. Next, we have the Works Progress Administration, so the WPA. This program hired millions of workers to carry out public works and projects, including making parks, schools, and highways. They use this money to provide jobs for painters, writers, and musicians, as well as other artists. So if you've ever seen an old building in New York that has like the paintings or the murals on the side, a lot of those were commissioned during the Works Progress Administration. It was a way for the federal government to give money to people, but also expect them to work for that money. So this was their approach to solving the problem that a lot of people had with the Federal Emergency Relief Act. So the FARA gave money and other necessary supplies to the poor without creating jobs. This one was giving money to the poor, but expecting them to work for that money. The Securities and Exchange Commission. So this program put in new rules for companies that sold stock. So before this, companies could do whatever they wanted, pretty much. Yeah. So it required companies to tell the truth about the stocks they were selling. People who were not told the truth could actually sue the company if they lied to them about the stocks. And this was to make people feel safe in investing in the stock market again, especially because people were very wary after it crashed towards the beginning of the Great Depression. Last but not least, we have the Social Security Administration of 1935. So in addition to the WPA, which gave jobs to people in exchange for money, because that's what a job is, this one focused on giving the elderly and the disabled and dependent mothers with children government aid. So that was like money and food. Sometimes it's housing vouchers, and it's to make sure that the underserved populations of America, so the widows or like the single moms, the disabled, the old people, that they have access to those resources that they really need in order to survive. In conclusion, we have 3 different categories for the New Deal programs. We only talked about 9 today, and we're only going to be focusing on 9 because those are the ones that we find pretty important to talk about. So these 9 categories fall into 3 different categories. We call these the 3 R's of the New Deal. So it's relief, recovery, and reform. Relief gives aid and assistance to those who need it most right at that moment. So it's a very temporary solution. It's like a Band-Aid. If I cut my hand, I know that I'm not going to need stitches because it's just like a little cut, and I put a Band-Aid on it. It doesn't solve the problem. There's still a cut, but it takes care of the problem for right now. So that is what I use to remember what relief is. Then we have recovery. Recovery programs were aimed at stimulating the economy, and it was meant to sustain the economy for a longer period of time. So I think of this as like, okay, I have a deeper cut and I'm gonna need stitches. So it's not a permanent solution, but I need stitches to make sure that it doesn't get infected and that it can heal properly. So this is like not a forever solution, but it's semi-permanent. Then we have reform. Reform is programs designed to establish fairer practices and regulate businesses to avoid another Great Depression. So I think of this as plastic surgery. So this completely changes the way that businesses practice and the way that they do business. So this is a permanent change that needed to be enacted in order to make business fairer and to make sure that there wasn't going to be another Great Depression in the future.